Welcome my YouTube channel, ladies and gentlemen. Detach emotionally. Now they'll chase you like never before. Let me tell you something they'll never teach in school. And most people never learn. The moment you detach emotionally is the moment the game changes. You become the one in control. You become the one they cannot read, cannot manipulate, and cannot forget. Most people think love, success, respect, they come from giving more, showing more, chasing more, but they don't. They come when you pull back, grow silent, and become unavailable to drama. Look around, desperation is repulsive. Clinginess destroys respect, but detachment, that's power. That's what makes people lean in, wonder, regret. When you detach, you tell the world, I control me. I'm not here to beg. I'm not here to impress. I'm here to live aligned with strength, with stillness, with purpose. This is Stoicism in action. You don't react, you respond. You don't chase, you attract. You don't attach, you observe. The Stoics taught us not to kill emotion, but to master it. To train our mind like a warrior trains his body, sharpened, a tested, unshakable dot, see? When you detach from needing their approval, their attention, or their validation, you stop orbiting them, and they start revolving around you. People feel. And when your attention pulls away, they feel your energy shift. And suddenly, the one who was silent becomes the loudest in their mind. Why? Because now you're a mystery. And the human mind hates unanswered questions. Your silence becomes a mirror. They project guilt, desire, confusion. They wonder why you're not reacting like before. That's the beauty of emotional discipline. You don't even have to speak volumes. This doesn't just apply to relationships. It's true in business, in leadership, in life. The calmest person in the room holds the most power. Why? Because calmness is clarity, and clarity is rare. Everyone else is busy chasing feelings. You're building foundations. So start practicing this habit. When they ghost, you don't chase. When they test, you don't react. When they disrespect, you walk away silently. When you feel attachment rise and return to self, the Stoic doesn't beg for attention. The Stoic commands respect by respecting themselves first. People only value what they fear losing. And when you stop giving unlimited access to your energy, your time, your emotions, they start fearing your absence. You flip the script. You become the prize, the lighthouse in the storm, the calm eye in the hurricane. And trust me, they feel it in your silence, in your discipline, in your distance. You want them to chase? Then let go. Let go of needing to be seen. Let go of needing to explain. Let go of needing to prove your worth. Your presence is powerful, but your absence, that's unforgettable. Embrace the Stoic habit of detachment, and they'll chase you like never before. Not because you played games, but because you stopped being one. Stand firm, detach, and let the world come to you. Emotional detachment is often misunderstood. The world mistakes it for coldness, for indifference, for a hardened heart. But that is not its truth. Emotional detachment, when rightly understood, is not a withdrawal from life, but a divine mastery of self. It is not the absence of love or feeling, but the presence of inner certainty so complete, so unmoved, that no outer condition can shake it. To detach emotionally is not to stop caring, it's to stop clinging. It is to cease that internal grasping, that fear-driven need to be seen, loved, or validated. It is not retreating into a shell. It is stepping into the center of yourself. When you are emotionally detached in the truest sense, you do not stop giving, you give more purely, more powerfully, without expectation, without bargain. All of life is consciousness. And emotional detachment is the decision to no longer allow external appearances to dictate the state of your inner world. The world outside is a mirror, not a master. You are not to bow to it, but to behold it as a reflection of your own inner arrangement. So when someone leaves, when something is denied, when chaos arises, you do not react. You do not fall. You return to yourself, to silence, to the inner knowing that your world proceeds from within. Most of humanity is enslaved by emotion, not because they feel too much, but because they never paused long enough to observe the feeling before it. Carried them away. They confuse the rush of reaction for truth, but the wise man knows the feeling is a servant, not a king. You are not the anger. You are not the desire. You are not the pain. You are the one aware of them. This is why detachment is liberation. You no longer get swept into the tides of every emotional storm. You sit above the clouds and watch the storm pass, untouched, unshaken. You learn to enter relationships, not from need, but from fullness. You no longer cry out, "Complete me," but instead say, "I meet you in wholeness." When one learns to detach emotionally, they enter a higher law. No longer moved by praise or blame, they are no longer manipulated by the world. The person who cannot be emotionally controlled becomes a magnet to all. For mystery arises, presence deepens. Power reveals itself, not in shouting, not in chasing, but in stillness. Now, let us look deeper into why attachment breeds weakness. Understand this. Anything you feel desperate to keep, you are already preparing to lose. That which you cling to, you suffocate. That which you idolize, you separate from. For when you say, "I need this thing," you are simultaneously affirming that you do not possess at hand. That sense of lack births fear. And fear destroys freedom. Attachment says, "I will only be whole if this person stays, if this situation changes, if I receive what I want." And thus, you place the keys of your peace in another's hands. But no man, no woman, no condition should have that kind of power over you. If your emotional state rises and falls with someone else's presence, you are not in love. You are in bondage. To be truly free is to know that. Nothing outside you can add or subtract from who you are. You were whole before they arrived. You were whole even if they depart. Detachment is the strength to let people come and go, to let opportunities rise and fall without collapsing within. For the one who is inwardly still is always aligned with their source, and from that source flows all things needed. Attachment begins in imagination. You imagine yourself incomplete. You imagine them as your answer, and so you pour your power into their image. You feed it, you nurture it, you become bound by it. But when you detach emotionally, you reclaim that energy. You cease projecting your worth into the world and instead dwell in the now, in the being that you already are. This is not about rejecting others. It is about no longer rejecting yourself. When you are inwardly full, you do not chase love, you express it. You do not need attention to radiate presence. The detachment is not cold, it is peaceful. It is warm. It is deeply magnetic because it does not pull from others. It rests in its own eternal supply. Look at how people behave when they feel they are losing something. Panic, clinginess, control, all of it born from a mind that believes its happiness lies elsewhere. But you were never meant to live with your soul chained to another's footsteps. Emotional dependency is a prison that looks like romance, but in time reveals itself as despair. The wise man observes all that arises within him. He watches emotion, but does not become it. He feels desire, but is not ruled by it. He experiences loss, but does not lose himself in it. This is the practice, not to feel less, but to stand above the feeling like a king watching his kingdom, never forgetting that the crown sits within, not without. So when you love, love deeply, but never forget yourself. When you serve, serve boldly, but do not lose your soul in the noise. The paradox is this: the more you detach from needing something, the more easily it flows to you. Why? because need repels. Okay. Desperation clouds the signal. But when you are detached, you are in your natural power. You become the mountain that does not move. And mountains attract all. Emotion is not the enemy. Blindness to emotion is. The moment you become aware of your feeling, it softens. It bends. It transforms. The same energy that once made you chase can be used to create. The same force that once made you fear can be used to imagine greater. So practice withdrawing not from people, but from the need to be constantly affirmed. Step back not in distance, but in energy. Breathe before reacting. Listen before speaking. Watch your thoughts before you obey them. And most of all, remember, you are not what happens to you. Okay? You are what you imagine about it. In the silence of detachment, you will find a power greater than any emotion. A power that does not beg to be seen. A power that does not announce itself. But it is there like still water beneath the noise. And when you live from that place, people will feel it. Not because you force them to, but because they cannot help but notice the one who no longer seeks. And so, detach. Not from life, but from illusion. Detach not from love, but from lack. Detach not to escape the world, but to create it anew from. The quiet center where you already are, all that you seek. There is no greater possession than the quiet. Mastery of one's own inner world. The man who governs his emotions, his impulses, his reactions, he governs reality itself. For everything begins not with action, but with consciousness. To control the self is not repression. It is refinement. Okay. It is not a denial of desire, but a transmutation of it. Because the world becomes their master. But when you understand the law of consciousness, when you realize that your outer world is a projection of your inner assumptions, then discipline becomes the gateway to dominion. You no longer throw your energy away by reacting to shadows. You shape the shadows by holding your vision steady. Power is not noise. It is not loud. It is not aggressive. Power is still, silent, centered. It is the man who can sit in the fire of temptation, of fear, of chaos and remained undisturbed. The key is the woman who, faced with insult, does not flinch. Who, confronted with rejection, does not retreat into doubt, but stands tall in her knowing. This control of self is not the end of feeling it. It's the beginning of knowing which feelings are worthy of your attention, okay? Which are illusions, begging to be fed. If the body is ruled by the senses, and the senses are ruled by the world, then the one who is ruled by the body is no more than a leaf tossed in the wind. But the one who rules his mind is not bound by what he sees, hears, or feels. He interprets all things from a higher vantage point. He chooses meaning. He selects his state of being deliberately to feel a surge of anger and not act on it. That his strength to feel a hunger for validation and yet remain silent. That is mastery. To feel the pull to lash out, to defend, to prove on, instead, to breathe and return to inner stillness. That is the highest form of power. For in that moment, you are not a puppet of emotion, but the author of reality. You must train yourself to observe rather than obey. Do not move simply because the body reacts. Do not speak simply because the mind races. Become still. Watch what arises. In the space between impulse and action, you reclaim your throne. And from that throne, you decree with force, but with faith. Not with volume, but with vision. It is in silence that the real transformation happens. The world rushes to speak, to react, to explain, but there is a presence more powerful than explanation. It is stillness. It is a gaze unshaken. It is a voice unspoken. When you walk into a room and do not need to be noticed, you are. When you enter a conversation and do not race to speak, your silence carries weight. People feel what you do not say. They lean in, not because you demand their attention, but because you withhold it. Silence is magnetic because it suggests depth. It suggests knowing. It suggests that you are in possession of something that cannot be shaken loose by conversation or conflict. The one who remains still in the face of chaos becomes a mirror to others. They begin to question their own noise, their own certainty. They begin to sense that you operate from a different law, higher command. The truly powerful speak less, not because they are timid, but because they know that energy spent unnecessarily is energy diluted. Every word should be deliberate. Every response should be chosen, not forced. When you feel the impulse to defend yourself, to explain your worth, to argue your point, pause. Let silence speak. Let your state carry the message. That which is, rooted in truth, does not scramble to prove itself. This inner calm, this restraint, is not something you perform. It is something you become through practice. It is cultivated in moments when you are tempted to lash out, and instead, you smile. Within, when someone misunderstands you, and you resist the urge to correct. When you are provoked, and yet you remain still, not because you are afraid to speak, but because you know that to descend to chaos is to abandon the throne of your being. You are not here to be understood by all. You are here to embody what? Silence makes your presence louder. It draws curiosity. It demands introspection from others. People begin to feel the weight of their own noise when confronted with your quiet. Not a cold quiet, but a radiant one. Not a withdrawn silence, but a confident stillness that needs no performance. Think of how the sun operates. It does not argue. It does not chase. Its pleas and all. Eye orients itself toward its light. So too must you learn to rise in the silence of your own certainty. Do not convince. Tease. Do not chase attention. Stand in the knowing that all things are drawn to the one who no longer needs them. When you feel the need to be seen, pause. Return within. That need is the echo of an old identity, the self, who believed he was separate, incomplete, unloved. But that self is an illusion. You do not need to be noticed to be valuable. You do not need to be praised to be powerful. Your value is intrinsic. Your power is eternal. And the more you detach from the need to display it, the more naturally it radiates from you. Self-control is not self-denial, till self-direction. It is choosing to align your inner world with the image you hold, not the reaction you feel. It's choosing imagination over impulse, stillness over struggle, clarity over noise. And from that choice, your world reconfigures itself, for consciousness is cause. When you hold this state of peace, the outer world mirrors peace. When you hold a state of dignity, others treat you with dignity. When you become silent, others begin to listen not because you demanded attention, but because you no longer required it. This is the way, not through the strength of will, but through the calm of knowing, not by overpowering the world, but by mastering the self. When you no longer rush to speak, the world leans in. When you no longer fight to be heard, the world begins to echo what you believe. This is not passive. It is profoundly active. It is the most disciplined way of being, for it requires you to remain firm in your inner vision, even when the outer world contradicts it. And so, you become a quiet force. Not silent out of fear, but silent from fullness. Not detached out of coldness, but detached because your warmth no longer needs to be proven. You begin to realize that every word is a seed, and you only plant what you desire to grow. You begin to see that the more still you become, the more power you hold not over others, but over the only thing that matters, your own state. The world cannot give you what you do not already accept within. Reaction, when you choose silence over noise, when you choose depth over display, the world conforms. Not because you chased it, but because you became it. Asterisk. There is a sacred law hidden beneath the surface of all relationships. All desires, all forms of human interactions. the law of presence and withdrawal. Few understand it, fewer live by it, and yet it governs more outcomes than any strategy, any pursuit, any outward effort. The law is simple. What is always available is taken for granted, and what is scarce becomes precious. This is not manipulation, it's spiritual economy. When your energy is always being extended outward, when your presence is given without boundaries, when your attention flows freely toward those who have not earned it, you become a fixture in their world rather than a force. The pearl has value not because it is large, but because it is rare. The diamond is not chased for its abundance, but for its absence in common spaces. So too is your presence when always present. It becomes background. When wisely withdrawn, it becomes magnetic. To make yourself scarce is not to isolate. Akia. It is not to become aloof or cold. It is to understand that your energy is sacred currency. That your time, your attention, your presence, they must not be poured out without measure. What is given freely without discernment loses its way. The child who is always handed toys does not treasure them. The lover who is always answered, always pursued, loses appreciation. When you are always available, you become expected, and expectation dulls gratitude. Scarcity is not about absence. It is about intention. It is the conscious act of retreating into self when your spirit senses imbalance. When the giving has become one-sided, when the presence is no longer valued, only consumed, you withdraw not out of spite, but out of clarity. You become still not to punish, but to remember your worth. And in that silence, the mirror begins. To form those who once overlooked your presence begin to feel the void. There is an invisible thread that connects all human hearts when one pulls away. The other must choose either to chase or to let go. If they chase, it is because the heart still longs. If they let go, it is because their intent was never rooted in depth, only in access. This is how scarcity refines the landscape of your life. It draws out the truth. It filters illusion, vision, exposes who saw you as a light and who only saw you as a lamp. You do not need to speak to be heard. The universe listens to states, not speeches. And when you enter the state of sacred withdrawal, the vibration of your presence does not disappear, intensifies. It rises into the unseen realm, and others feel it in ways they cannot name. They remember your laugh, your silence, your gaze, not because you reminded them, but because you stopped showing up for those who refuse to see. Many will only begin to notice what you were when you are no longer there. This is not bitterness. It's the quiet revelation of truth. For when your presence is constant, others build around it. But when it is gone, they must face the architecture of their own soul. Some will realize they built nothing. Others will remember that they once stood in the presence of something rare, and they will seek to return. There is no need to chase. The soul that knows its value walks away from all that treats it as an option. The one who has cultivated inner richness no longer begs to be kept. They understand that to remain in places where their worth is unrecognized is to participate in their own diminishment. So they retreat not in fear, but in faith. Scarcity is an invitation to recalibration. When you withdraw your presence, you return to your center. But you take back the scattered pieces of yourself. You stop leaking energy into empty vessels. And in that sacred returning, you find what was always there, an inexhaustible source, untouched. By who stayed or left, that source is what must be protected. It is a light that becomes visible only when you stop trying to shine it on everyone else. Now consider the next unveiling. When you detach emotionally, when you step back not in anger, but in awareness, you begin to see with new eyes. You begin to discern not with emotion, but with spirit. And this is where the illusion crumbles. Detachment reveals true faces not because it changes them, but because it removes the fog that covered your sight. As long as you are emotionally entangled, you cannot see clearly. You see through the lens of desire. You see what you hope to see, what you wish to be true. But the moment you detach, the image shifts. The mask slips. Some who appeared loyal were simply entertained. Some who spoke of love were only interested in reflection. Some who stayed close did so, not out of care, but out of convenience. Detachment becomes the sacred filter. When you no longer need someone to stay, you are finally able to ask, should they? When you no longer fear walking alone, you can. See who walks beside you out of freedom, not out of need. Okay. And in this clarity, truth becomes unavoidable. Okay. Some relationships dissolve, some strengthen. Some fall away silently, others explode. But all of it reveals. You begin to learn that presence was never the gift. Attention was never the treasure. It was always energy. And the way others interacted with your energy told you everything. But when you were too close, you could not hear it. When you were too involved, their words covered their intentions. Only distance uncovers depth. Only silence unmasks motive. And so, detachment becomes the divine invitation to truth. It is the spiritual mirror that cannot be shattered. When you step back, others must step forward or fall behind. They must show you who they really are. It's no longer cloaked in the comfort of your constant attention. Some will attempt to pull you back in, not out of love, but out of habit. Okay. They miss the reflection of themselves in your eyes. Okay. But the soul that has seen truth cannot unsee it. The person who has tasted peace cannot return to noise. Detachment is the threshold, and once crossed, you either rise or return, but the returning must be conscious, not coerced. Detachment does not remove love. It reveals whether love was ever there. It does not sever connection, it tests it. And if the connection breaks, it was never so deep. Only surface tied. If it holds, then it is born not of fear or need, but of knowing. Let your withdrawal be gentle. Let your silence be holy. Let your absence be as intentional as your presence. For in that space, the real alchemy happens. You are no longer performing. You are no longer negotiating your value. You are simply being. And in your being, you begin to call forth only that which recognizes itself in you. All that is real remains. All that is false fades. This is not loss. This is alignment. This is not ending. It is elevation. And in this sacred scarcity, in this radiant detachment, your true life begins. Asterisk, there is a subtle but powerful truth hidden behind all appearances. And that is this. What you react to, you give power to. What you cling to, you declare to be greater than yourself. And what you fear losing, you show you do not yet truly possess within. The practice of detachment is not a withdrawal from life, but an immersion into the deeper layers of it. It is the process by which you begin to re-identify not as the one who grasps, but as the one who creates. Detachment is not a suppression of emotion. It is a sacred stance. A place of clarity that remains rooted while the world sways. It is the art of experiencing all things without being defined by them. You can love deeply, give fully, move freely, not be entangled in outcomes, not be a hostage to another's response, not be made small by the movements of outer appearances. You will remain still inside. When you reach the point of conscious detachment, you discover a strength that no one else can provide and no one else can take. A strength that does not scream, does not assert itself in noise, but simply is. It appears in the silent refusal to chase after what the soul no longer recognizes as aligned. It appears when you walk away without drama, not because you don't care, but because you return to caring rightly for what cannot be lost. Your own inner state in this detachment. You begin to choose from a different place. Longer chase feelings. You no longer beg the world to confirm your worth. You no longer seek the temporary comfort of being seen at the cost of forgetting yourself. You become selective, not out of pride, but out of presence. You recognize that what you allow in has to match what you are becoming, not what you used. To be to detach is to live from the core rather than the surface. The surface fluctuates it. It's where emotions rise and fall like tides, but beneath it lies the unshakable. When you dwell there, you respond. You don't react. You observe. You don't absorb. You hold, but you don't grip. And in doing so, you conserve power. You refine it. You turn it inward until it glows. This inner strength, once cultivated, transforms your experience. You no longer view disappointment as a wound, but as a mirror. You no longer see rejection as destruction, but as redirection. You no longer require constant assurance because your faith is rooted in the unseen, not the visible. This is where true power emerges, not in controlling others, but in no longer needing to. The detachment is not against love. It is the purification of love. For love in its highest form is not possession. It is freedom. It is not about holding someone tightly so they don't leave. It is about being so rooted in your own being that they are free to stay or go on if they stay. It is from truth, not obligation. It is not about being the only thing in someone's life. It is about being something so whole, so sovereign, that your presence is not a demand, but a gift. And something happens when you live this way. When you detach from need, you become radiant. When you stop chasing, you become noticed. When you cease to plead, your silence echoes louder than 1,000 words. For most of the world is locked in pursuits, seeking, striving, craving validation, chasing the mirage. But when you step out of the chase, you shift position, a T. You move from the seeker to the source. It is not the one who chases that holds the power. It is the one who walks aligned with inner truth, who embodies stillness. That one becomes the prize. For chasing implies lack, and lack repels. But stillness implies fullness, and fullness draws. This is the unseen law. The one who needs nothing becomes the one to whom all things are offered. This reversal is not arrogance. It is alignment. It is not about becoming cold. It's about becoming clear. When you no longer chase love, you begin to attract real connection. When you no longer pursue attention, your presence speaks. When you no longer hunger for validation, the world begins to reflect what you already know. And this is not something you pretend. It is not a game. You cannot fake detachment to lure someone closer. The energy does not lie. It is not about acting indifferent while still being bound inwardly. That contradiction speaks louder than any intention. Detachment is not about behavior. It is about state. When your state changes, your world conforms. The chaser believes he must do more to be seen. He must reach further, give more, prove his value. But the one who is aligned knows that his being is enough. That the very breath he takes in stillness is more attractive than all the striving in the world. Not because he does nothing, but because everything he does flows from inner peace, not inner panic. When you stop chasing, the noise within begins to quiet. You begin to hear what you had silenced through activity. You begin to feel what had been covered in distraction. You begin to sense who you really are, beyond the stories, the past, the patterns. And in that space, something rises, a strength, untouched by history, a clarity that was always waiting to be remembered. To become the prize is not to elevate the self above others, but to remember what you are beneath the masks. It is to stop lowering your frequency to meet those who have forgotten theirs. It is to remain anchored while the tides shift, to remain present while others grasp, to stand still while others run. And from that place, you become a beacon not because you forced it, but because you ceased to hide. There is no chase in love that is whole. There is only flow. There is recognition, not desperation. There is invitation, not demand. The prize does not declare itself to be valuable. It is valuable in silence, and those who are ready to recognize it do. Those who are not, leave. Either way, the value remains untouched. And so the one who once chased begins to rest, begins to know, begins to receive. For in stopping the pursuit of what is outside, he becomes the embodiment of what is within. And in that embodiment, everything changes. People sense it. Circumstances bend. The very air around him begins to move differently, not because he is doing more, but because he finally understands he was never meant to chase what was always his by being Dot. Let them come.